Story number 1. If you think driving a truck down the lower 48 is tough, try pulling 80,000 pounds of drilling equipment up the Dalton highway to Prudhoe Bay when it's 40 below zero. Out here, the ice isn't just on the road, it is the road. I was solo driving a specialized 3-axle Western Star Semi, hauling a critical piece of blowout prevention machinery destined for an oil rig on the north slope. The sun hadn't crossed the horizon in 3 weeks, leaving the world a permanent, pitch-black void of frozen tundra and jagged peaks. The psychological weight of the ice roads is heavy enough to break a man. When the wind picks up across the flats, it triggers a ground whiteout, erasing the horizon line until there is no sky, no road, just a blank sheet of blinding white in your high beams. Your mind starts playing tricks on you after 12 hours of staring into nothing. You start seeing shapes in the swirling snow. Or worse, you start believing you're driving on solid ground when you're actually hovering over a frozen river with only 4 feet of blue ice keeping you from a watery grave. My hands were stiff from fighting the steering wheel against 50-mile-an-hour crosswinds, my eyes burning from the glare, just praying for a sheltered valley or a wide river gravel turnout to check my tire chains and stretch my freezing legs. Just north of the Brooks Range, the road dips onto a frozen river basin where the state troopers maintain an emergency ice testing turnout, a wide, flat shelf of river ice cleared of snowdrifts, so drivers can safely pull over, away from the high-speed haul trucks. I guided the long Western Star onto the frozen basin, the heavy tires letting out a deep, echoing groan as the immense weight of the rig transferred onto the ice shelf. I set the tractor parking brakes with a loud, frozen snap of compressed air, but I didn't dare shut off the engine. At 40 below, if you kill a diesel, the fuel lines gel up into solid candle wax within 10 minutes, and you're dead in the dark. The silence outside was terrifying. The thick white fog of my own exhaust billowed past the windows, completely swallowing the truck and cutting off the view of the main mountain pass. The only light came from the dim blue glow of my dashboard indicators and the long, white beams of my front halogens reflecting off a wall of jagged, wine-sculpted pressure ridges ahead. I pulled my heavy-down parka tight, adjusted my headlamp, and stepped down from the cab into the bone-chilling air. The cold didn't just feel cold. It felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest, freezing the moisture in my nose instantly. I walked slowly along the driver's side of the trailer, striking each massive tire with my steel tire iron to ensure none of the brakes had frozen locked in the sub-zero temperatures. As I reached the back of the trailer, my flashlight beam cut through the frozen exhaust fog and caught a strange, dark line running across the ice right beneath my rear dual axles. My chest tightened in pure panic. I knelt down on the ice, aiming the light directly down. It wasn't a shadow. It was a fresh, widening fracture line in the river ice. Deep down inside the dark crack, a steady, rhythmic stream of tiny air bubbles was rising rapidly to the surface, and the ice beneath my boots was beginning to vibrate with a low, hollow hum. I backed away from the crack, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. This wasn't a normal thermal fracture caused by the dropping temperature. The ice beneath my rig was actively failing. A sudden, unannounced upstream release from an active thermal spring had raised the water temperature beneath the shelf, eating away at the ice from the inside out until it was less than 2 feet thick. Then, my flashlight beam caught a piece of reflective yellow metal frozen solid inside a mound of snow just 10 feet away from the fracture line. I scrambled over, clearing the snow away with my boot. It was the rusted, crushed roof of an old Kenworth cab that had broken through the ice years ago. But looking down through the clear, dark blue ice right next to it, I didn't see an empty wreckage. Frozen perfectly in the solid ice, just inches beneath the surface, was the pale, wide-eyed face of a long-dead driver, and his frozen fingers were actively pointing straight toward the widening fracture beneath my own wheels. Panic took over as the ice road gave a massive, sickening heave. The fracture line split wide open, a steady torrent of black, freezing river water erupting from the crack and rushing over the white surface of the turnout. The men who drive the North Slope tell stories about the ice hunger, the sudden catastrophic structural failure of a frozen trail that pulls a rig down into the depths before the driver can even open the door. The ice plate beneath my trailer began to sag violently, the 60,000-pound load tilting toward the freezing water as the rear axles sank 4 inches into the slush. "Get back in the cab, now!" A voice seemed to echo in my mind, born of pure survival instinct, as another loud explosion cracked through the basin, splitting the ice right between my feet. The ice shelf split completely behind me, dropping my trailer's rear bumper into the freezing water. The sudden shift caused the heavy steel frame of my truck to twist violently, the metal groaning under immense structural stress as the front steering axle lifted nearly 2 inches off the solid ground. The freezing river water surged forward, instantly coating my boots in a layer of solid ice as it rushed across the remaining turnout. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward, throwing my body through the open door of my Western Star cab just as the driver's side steps sheared off against a rising pressure ridge. I slammed the heavy door, throwing my weight onto the differential lock switches and grabbing the gear shifter as the entire truck began to slide backward into the widening, black abyss of the frozen river. I rammed the transmission into reverse for a split, second to slam the trailer against a solid pressure ridge, then threw it into first gear and buried the accelerator pedal into the floorboards. The 15-liter diesel engine roared with pure fury, the massive dual tires spinning violently on the wet ice, throwing up a spectacular shower of frozen slush and ice chips as the truck fought for traction. For 3 agonizing seconds, the rig hung on the edge of destruction, the engine screaming. At redline as the back of the trailer pulled the whole truck toward the dark water, but the raw, brutal horsepower of the Western Star found traction on a patch of exposed river gravel. The massive semi lunged forward, tearing itself out of the collapsing ice shelf just as the entire turnout subsided into the black river. With a deafening roar, I pushed the truck up the mountain pass, never looking back, until I reached the safety of the Coldfoot camp, 50 miles north. When the Department of Transportation crews went down to inspect the basin the next morning, they found the entire turnout had vanished into the river, along with the old wreckage from decades ago. I still haul freight to the North Slope, but I never stop on a river basin after dark anymore, because out here in the Arctic silence, the ice isn't just a road, it's a living thing, and it's always waiting for you to slip. Story number 2. When you're running a load across the frozen lakes of the Yukon, border on the ice roads, your worst enemy isn't the cold, it's the isolation. It was late January, right around 4:15 a.m., and a massive Arctic blizzard had dropped visibility down to 0, turning the world outside into a terrifying, featureless wall of white. I was solo driving an older Peterbilt, hauling a heavy load of construction timber destined for a remote mining camp near Tok, Alaska. The physical exhaustion of driving through a true Arctic whiteout is a slow poison. Without trees, rocks, or lane markers, your brain loses its sense of balance. You can't tell if you're moving forward, turning left, or sliding sideways off the reinforced ice trail. My shoulders were completely locked from wrestling the steering wheel against the high winds, my eyes bloodshot from trying to find the faint edge of the snowdrifts. I knew that if I didn't find an official safety turnout, or a wide spot on the lake ice to park and wait out the whiteout, I'd drive straight off the deep water, trail and capsize the whole rig into the drifts. Through the swirling sheets of white, I spotted the flashing amber light of a temporary dot safety marker, a long, wide stretch of thick lake ice that had been plowed out next to a small island to give drivers a safe place to ride out storms. I carefully guided the long Peterbilt into the dark pocket, the heavy tire chains clanking loudly against the hard-packed snow before coming to a stop. Beneath the shadow of a few frozen spruce trees, I set the parking brakes with a sharp air hiss, leaving the engine idling high to keep the heater from freezing up in the 50-below storm. The silence that settled over the cab was heavy and unnatural. The thick blowing snow completely covered the windshield, turning the cab into a small, dark survival pod. The only sound for miles was the low, steady purr of my diesel engine and the terrifying howl of the wind outside. I needed to check my external fuel filters to make sure they weren't icing over, so I grabbed my heavy flashlight and climbed down out of the warm cab. The wind hit me like a wall of broken glass, stripping the breath from my lungs instantly. I walked around the front bumper, holding my hand over my face to shield my eyes from the biting snow. As I aimed my flashlight beam down toward the ground to check my front axle, I noticed a strange, perfectly circular hole melted into the thick ice right next to my driver's side steering tire. My blood ran cold. I knelt down, shielding the hole from the wind. It was about 6 inches wide, the edges smooth and perfectly cut, looking like someone had used an industrial ice auger. But it hadn't been drilled from the top. The frozen slush around the edges was pushed upward, as if something had breached the 4-foot layer of lake ice from the dark water below. I stood up, spinning around to scan the dark safety turnout. The blowing snow made it impossible to see more than 5 feet, but as I aimed my flashlight beam at the side of my aluminum fuel tank, I froze. Covering the metal tank were hundreds of fresh, dripping wet handprints, long, thin finger marks that had instantly frozen into solid gray ice against the hot aluminum. A wave of pure horror swept over me. This wasn't a deserted safety turnout. Something was active out on the frozen lake, using the blinding whiteout as cover to target stationary trucks. Suddenly, a heavy metallic thud echoed from the top of my trailer, followed by the terrifying sound of heavy, wet footsteps dragging themselves slowly across the roof of the cab directly above my head. I scrambled back up the chrome steps, diving into the driver's seat just as the passenger side window shattered inward in a shower of sharp glass. A blast of sub-zero wind filled the cab, and through the broken frame, a long, emaciated arm reached inside. The skin a translucent, waterlogged gray, the fingernails worn down to the bone. A low, wet, rattling sound filled the cab over the roar of the heater coming from the white void right outside the broken window. "Let us in, driver," a chorus of muffled, distorted voices seemed to whisper through the howling wind. "The water is so cold. Let us sit by the fire." More heavy thuds shook the trailer as 3 more wet, frozen figures emerged from the whiteout, their bodies dripping with black lake water that turned to ice on their skin as they clawed at the rear doors of the truck. The creature at the passenger window lunged further inside, its pale, featureless face appearing through the blowing snow, its eyes wide and milky white with the blindness of the deep water. Its frozen fingers locked onto my heavy winter coat, pulling me toward the broken window with an unnatural, terrifying strength that defied the frozen air. I panicked, grabbing my heavy tire iron from the floor and swinging it with everything I had across the creature's frozen forearm. A sharp, brittle sound echoed through the cab as the frozen bone snapped like an icicle. The creature let out no cry of pain, only a low, wet hiss as it released my coat, sliding backward off the step into the swirling whiteout outside. I slammed the transmission into gear, popped the parking brakes, and slammed my boot onto the accelerator. The heavy semi screamed, the tire chains biting deep into the hard-packed snow and ice as the truck launched forward through the blinding white wall. I didn't care about the trail markers or the visibility. I pushed the old Peterbilt through the driving blizzard, the heavy bumper clearing massive drifts as I fled the dark island. I drove for 40 miles without stopping, ignoring the shivering cold coming through the broken passenger window, until I reached the bright lights of a state trooper outpost on the Alaska border. The troopers boarded up my window and searched the lake trail when the storm cleared the next morning, but they found nothing but an empty safety turnout and several open holes in the ice that had already refrozen over. The old-timers in talk told me later about a supply expedition that had vanished into the lake back during the gold rush era. Their bodies never recovered from the deep water. I still run the winter trails, but I never park near the lake islands during a whiteout anymore, because I know that out here in the Yukon cold, the things that freeze under the ice are always looking for a way to get warm. Story number 3. When the winter temperature stays at 30 below for 2 months, the Kuskokwim River transforms into a commercial highway stretching hundreds of miles into the Alaskan bush. It's the only way to get heavy freight to the remote native villages. But running it means playing a game of Russian roulette with the river currents. I was solo driving a modern freightliner, hauling a heavy 70,000-pound load of fuel oil in winter, supplies destined for a remote outpost near Bethel. The mental strain of river driving is absolute torture. The ice under your wheels is constantly moving, expanding and contracting over a fast-moving water current that can erode a 12-foot layer of ice down to 4 inches in a single afternoon. You have to keep your window rolled down and your seatbelt off at all times. If the truck starts to go through, you have exactly 3 seconds to dive out into the snow before the cab sinks like a stone. My hands were freezing from the open window. My ears strained to listen for the specific, sharp pop of failing ice over the steady rumble of my own transmission. I was desperately looking for an official Doty River turnout, just to check my load straps and give my nerves a break from the constant tension near a sharp bend in the river. I spotted the reflective markers for an old gravel bar turnout, a wide, solid shelf of land where the riverbed rises out of the water, providing a perfectly stable, Foundation where the ice cannot fail beneath a heavy load. I guided the long freightliner onto the snow-covered gravel bar, the heavy tires bringing the rig to a safe stop against a line of frozen willow bushes. I set the parking brakes with a loud air hiss, leaving the headlights on so the bright halogen beams cut through the rising ice fog. The atmosphere outside was dead and still. The air was thick, with ice fog, a frozen mist of tiny ice crystals that hangs in the air at extreme temperatures, scattering the light from my headlamps into a creepy, diffused white glow that made it impossible to see the active river channel just 30 feet away. I needed to check the valves on my fuel trailer to make sure the freezing mist hadn't jammed the emergency shutoffs. So I grabbed my heavy tire iron and climbed down onto the frozen gravel. The air was so cold it made my teeth ache through my breath mask as I walked along the side of the long aluminum tank. Everything looked clean and secure. But as I walked toward the rear bumper to check my trailer clearance, my flashlight beam cut across the snow-covered gravel right next to my rear tires. I stopped dead in my tracks, my throat going dry. Sticking out of the frozen snowdrifts were dozens of old weathered wooden trail stakes, the traditional markers used by the local mushers to mark the historic winter dog sled trails. But these stakes hadn't been placed to guide travelers. They were arranged in a tight, concentric circle completely surrounding my truck, and each wooden stake was wrapped in a thick braid of black human hair. I stepped closer, aiming my light at the nearest marker. The black hair was frozen stiff, glistening like wire in the halogen beam. I cleared the snow away from the base of the stake with my boot, and my stomach turned over in pure terror. Buried under the snow at the foot of each stake was a small carved bone amulet depicting a creature with a human torso and the jaw of a wolf, the traditional symbol used by the old-timers to warn travelers of the Kushtaka, the shape-shifting land otter spirits of the northern wilderness. This wasn't a standard safety turnout. I had pulled my rig directly into an ancient, cursed burial ground that the river had exposed over decades of erosion. Suddenly, the steady, low purr of my freightliner's diesel engine began to sputter and die, the electronics on my dashboard flickering wildly as a deep, guttural howling erupted from the thick ice fog all around my truck. The ice fog seemed to thicken, pressing against the truck like a living wall as my headlights died out completely, leaving nothing but the faint amber glow of my hazard lights. From the darkness of the river channel, dozens of low, crouching shadows emerged through the mist, their bodies moving with a strange fluid coordination that looked half human and half animal. They didn't make a sound as they swarmed the truck, their long, clawed fingers scratching violently against the metal panels as they climbed toward the cab windows. "Step down from the steel, driver," a soft, familiar voice suddenly called out from the darkness right outside my open window. It sounded exactly like my father's voice, warm and clear despite the sub-zero air. "The trail is gone. Come walk with us in the woods." I threw myself into the cab, slamming the door shut, but the creature at the open window lunged inside before I could roll the glass up. Its face was a horrific, shifting mass of pale human skin and dark fur, its eyes glowing with a feral yellow light as its long claws tore through the vinyl dashboard padding. The temperature inside the cab dropped instantly, the breath freezing on my lips as the entity reached for my throat. I didn't think. I grabbed my heavy tire iron from the passenger seat and brought it down with all my strength onto the creature's clawed wrist. A hollow, metallic thud echoed through the cab as the iron struck home. The entity let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek that sounded like a wounded animal, releasing its grip and tumbling backward off the chrome steps into the dark ice fog below. I turned the ignition key frantically, and the diesel engine sputtered, coughed, and exploded back to life with a violent roar of black exhaust. I slammed the transmission into its lowest gear, popped the parking brakes, and buried my boot into the accelerator. The heavy semi lunged forward, the massive dual tires tearing through the wooden stakes and the frozen willow bushes as the truck broke free of the gravel bar. I pushed the freightliner down the open river channel at dangerous speeds, ignoring the cracking ice beneath my wheels, until I reached the bright lights of the Bethel Distribution Center an hour later. The local authorities and elders listened to my story in quiet silence, nodding their heads but warning me never to stop near that bend in the river again. They told me that during the high water years, the river reclaims the old burial bars, and the spirits that roam the ice fog are always looking for a soul to lead off the trail. I still drive the winter river routes when the ice is thick, but I never pull over near the gravel bars after dark anymore. Because I know that out here in the Alaskan bush, the road beneath your wheels isn't just ice, and the voices in the fog aren't always human. Please subscribe and like the video to support the channel. Thank you.